Seeking a solution, President Trump delivers his long-awaited plan for lowering drug prices. We have a report from the White House. Natural disaster. A Hawaii volcano is threatening to blow its top in the coming days after sputtering lava for a week. Building bridges. We speak to a faith leader in the American Jewish community as the U.S. prepares to open its new embassy in Jerusalem. And hitting the right notes. The Sistine Chapel Choir delights crowds with a surprise performance in New York. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, May 11th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. President Trump reveals his plan to save Americans money by lowering prescription drug prices. He wants to increase competition among drug companies and give them incentives to cut patient costs. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. President Trump has a multi-point plan to lower the price you pay at the pharmacy counter. He doesn't think it's right that Americans pay a lot more for prescription drugs than people in other countries.
It's unfair, and it's ridiculous, and it's not going to happen any longer.
The president's point person on this initiative, Secretary of Health and Human Services Alex Azar. The former drug company executive says HHS proposals will increase competition in drug markets, develop options to lower out-of-pocket spending, offer discounts within Medicare drug plans, and create incentives for manufacturers to lower prices.
With real competition and with the right incentives, your blueprint is going to finally put American patients first.
We are not going to reward companies that constantly raise prices.
Democrats agree with the president that prescription drug prices need to come down.
But the question is not what you say about it, no matter how tough your language, it's what you do about it.
If the president endorses legislation to finally let HHS negotiate with drug companies, I will be the first to commend him.
In the Rose Garden today, President Trump did say he wants to give Medicare Part D plans new tools to negotiate lower prices. Medicare is the largest purchaser of prescription drugs in the nation, but it has been barred by law from negotiating lower prices with drug makers. Wyatt?
Mark, I heard Secretary Azar also made a proposal about the drug ads we always see on TV. What's his plan?
Well, you always see a long list of prescription side effects in those advertisements. Secretary Azar also wants pharmaceutical companies to include the price of their products in those TV ads so people will know what those prescriptions will cost. Wyatt?
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. President Trump says America is rocking at a rally in Indiana last night. The president talked up the economy, but says things would change if Democrats win the midterm elections in November.
And all of the great momentum that we're having as a country on jobs, on safety, on security, on our military, it's all at stake in November.
The president also called it an incredible honor to welcome home the 3 Americans who were imprisoned in North Korea. The Senate confirms a Wisconsin attorney as a federal judge despite the objections of one of his home state senators.
The yeas are 49, the nays are 46, and the nomination is confirmed.
The Senate voted on party lines. Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin voted against Michael Brennan taking the opening on the 7th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. The seat has been vacant for more than 8 years, the longest for a nation's appellate courts. The Kilauea volcano in Hawaii has already destroyed dozens of structures, and things may get worse as the Aloha State heads into the weekend. It's been a week since the Kilauea volcano erupted in Hawaii.
Well, it seems like the cracks are spreading.
And there's no telling about what may be coming over the next few weeks.
This is an ongoing event with no end in sight that anyone can make any kind of firm predictions. It's still a very fluid situation.
Volcanic lava has already destroyed at least 36 structures and blanketed nearly 117 acres.
As the lava lake has receded deep into the crater, the rocks in the steep crater walls are falling into that, and that's creating gas explosions.
State officials say Kilauea's activity resembles what was seen right before a major eruption in 1924, when enormous rocks called ballistic boulders were launched from the earth. Other potential hazards that could be coming: acid rain, volcanic smog, known as VOG, and even more lava.
You just want to cry and hug everybody because everybody's in the same situation.
Many residents have been forced to evacuate their homes, and they're not sure when or whether they'll have anything to return to.
We think fondly of Madame Pele. We've left her a glass of gin. We hope that she thinks we're good stewards and sees fit to leave our land and home intact.
Most of the Hawaii Volcanoes National Park is closed today as officials are concerned about the explosions. The Philippine Supreme Court ousts its Chief Justice, a critic of the country's authoritarian president. Justice Maria Lourdes Sereno is accused of failing to file mandatory financial paperwork. She denies the allegations. The judge has accused President Duterte of human rights violations in his brutal crackdown on drugs. Nearly 2,000 people in Manila protested her ousting. A Catholic bishop in Ireland says the upcoming referendum on abortion could, quote, change the country forever. Bishop Fantan Monahan is urging Irish Catholics to choose life by voting to uphold the Eighth Amendment. It recognizes the equal right to life of a mother and her unborn baby. The vote is coming up on May 25th. Iraqis vote tomorrow in the first parliamentary election since the country declared victory over ISIS. Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi is running for re-election, but is facing stiff competition from his predecessor, and nearly 7,000 candidates are vying for 329 parliament seats. The country continues to struggle with corruption and violence. Jim Phillips, Senior Research Fellow for Middle Eastern Affairs at the Heritage Foundation, joins us with more analysis. So, Jim, there's a lot at stake for the Iraqi government here. I mentioned just a few of them, but what are the main issues here that are on the concerns, on the minds of Iraqis?
Well, ISIS has been all but defeated. There's still pockets of ISIS holdouts, but the country has been scarred by this predominantly Sunni uprising, and there needs to be some kind of national reconciliation to include Sunni moderate political leaders in the next government. There's also tremendous tension between the Kurds and the Shiite-dominated government because the Kurds were heading towards independence last fall, and those problems need to be smoothed over. But the real big problem is the economy. There's still a lot of corruption in the government, and many common Iraqis are fed up with what they see as poor governance at the hands of past leaders.
Iraq declared victory over ISIS, as you know, 6 months ago, but there are still, as you allude to here, small pockets of violence in the country. So how much danger do all those that you were referring to before actually pose for your everyday citizen and also for those Christians and the people who are the most vulnerable?
Well, ISIS is returning to its terrorist grassroots. When it was known as Al-Qaeda in Iraq, it operated as an underground operation instead of carving out its so-called caliphate. And I think it's going to go back to that modus operandi. And as you mentioned, I think the Christians who in the past have been lightning rods for terrorist attacks are very much at risk because ISIS loves to pick them up, to pick them out for murderous sprees.
Iraq has many ethnic and religious groups. Why is building an inclusive government so important?
Because Iraq is a kind of a heterogeneous country in the sense that about 55% of the people are Shiite Arabs, another, say, 20% are Sunni Arabs, and then a lot of the rest are Kurds, Christians, Yazidis, Turkomans, smaller minority groups that historically have been lorded over by the majority Shia in the last 15 years, but before that by Saddam Hussein's Sunni regime. So there's a lot of room for reconciliation if Iraq is going to function as a regular country.
The U.S.-led coalition has been supporting Iraqi ground troops for more than 3 years. In your view now, moving forward, what should the U.S. do in playing a role in the future of Iraq?
Well, I think in military terms we can step back, maintain our air support and intelligence support, perhaps drone reconnaissance and surveillance. But I think the Iraqis are at this point are well positioned to finish the job against ISIS. So the U.S. has been drawing down its forces and primarily doing training and air missions.
And I know the Pentagon has voiced their confidence with the Iraqi security forces in terms of defending the country with these upcoming elections. Jim Phillips with the Heritage Center, thanks so much for your analysis.
Thank you.
Catholic officials in Poland say they continue to strengthen their friendship with Polish Jews. It comes in the wake of a new law which criminalizes any statement that blames Poland for cooperating with Nazis during the Holocaust. The law has drawn criticism, and some Polish lawmakers are accused of making anti-Semitic remarks. The new U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem will open on Monday. It's moving from Tel Aviv after President Trump recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. He ordered the move last year, fulfilling a key campaign promise, but it's led to condemnation from many U.S. allies who say the decision makes it more difficult to achieve peace between Israelis and Palestinians. The opening Monday comes as Israel celebrates 70 years as a state. Rabbi J. Rosenbaum, president of the North American Board of Rabbis, joins us now from Rome. He's there to celebrate the anniversary with the Jewish community, one of the most ancient in the world. Rabbi Rosenbaum, how does the American Jewish community view the decision to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem?
The great sense of enthusiasm, appreciation, and hope that it will move the cause of peace forward. Recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel by the United States, beacon of democracy, recognizing the right of another democratic state, the Jewish democratic state of Israel, to define and to state what their capital is in keeping with the highest principles of America, an acknowledgement of a truth that has existed for 3,000 years.
Well, Rabbi, as you know, tensions are high in Israel right now. The country has fired missiles in response to what it says was an Iranian rocket in the Golan Heights. As a faith leader, what would be your approach to lessening the tension and avoiding war?
Cool heads have to prevail. Leaders have to accept the realities of what a war would mean, the devastation it would bring. I don't believe for one moment that Israel is seeking war or an all-out conflict with Iran in the Golan Heights. And I hope those feelings resonate in Tehran as well.
You work closely with the Vatican to promote interfaith dialogue. The relationship between Jews and Catholics has had its ups and downs over the last century. How would you describe the relationship right now?
Remarkable. It's a testimony that miracles do happen. I was here for the canonization of John Paul II and John the 23rd, who changed the dialogue between the Catholic Church and world Jewry. Worked with Saint John Paul II, with Pope Benedict, had encounters with Pope Francis, speaking about our communality, our sense of sisterhood and brotherhood, a common heritage that we've taken based on our own understanding of what the Holy wants from us. I would say the state of Jewish-Catholic relations is nothing less than this, a recognition that what happens to one person of faith anywhere affects all people of faith everywhere.
You had mentioned an encounter with Pope Francis. I know in 2015 you and your wife had that personal encounter with him. Tell us a little bit about that.
He blessed my wife, who had suffered a terrible illness. And I believe, as all Jews believe, that prayer and blessings come from any godly individual, carries great power. His humanity, his warmth, his concern for people of all faiths, shone through.
Such an important message, and that sounds like an incredible story as well. Rabbi J. Rosenbaum, president of the North American Board of Rabbis, thanks so much for telling us about your experience.
Thank you, and I'm honored to share it with you.
Catholic bishops from Chile are on their way to the Vatican to meet with Pope Francis for what is expected to be a frank conversation. The Holy Father says he was misled about Bishop Juan Barros, who was accused of witnessing sex abuse and not taking action. Francis rejected his resignation after the Pope was apparently told the bishop was innocent. The Pope apologized in person to 3 victims of the scandal earlier this month. Coming up, we examine the rise in assisted suicide around the world and a look at how much money Americans will spend on Mother's Day. Pope Francis asked young people in Sicily to resist the temptation to join the mafia. The message was delivered in a telegram on the 25th anniversary of Pope John Paul II's famous speech on the island. He scolded criminals and called on them to convert. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. The Vatican says they support United Nations policies that promote quality education and health care for refugee children. The Archbishop, who represents the Holy See at the UN in Geneva, says the new measures, quote, inspire hope and greatly contribute to restoring dignity. A Catholic official says the Trump administration's policy of zero tolerance for illegal immigrants is inhumane. Ashley Feasley, who runs migration and refugee services for the U.S. bishops, says the plan goes against Catholic values and the sanctity of the family. The bishops are concerned the policy could separate children from their parents. For more on the story, visit CatholicNewsAgency.com. A 104-year-old Australian biologist and right-to-die advocate ends his life in Switzerland. David Goodall said he started thinking about suicide after his quality of life deteriorated over the last year. He traveled to Switzerland, where assisted suicide is legal and becoming more frequent. 9 years ago, there were 297 deaths in Switzerland. By 2015, the most recent year tabulated, the number of deaths more than tripled to 965. Dr. Joseph Capiz, professor of moral theology and ethics and the executive director of the Institute for Human Ecology at the Catholic University of America, joins us now. So, Dr. Capiz, this David Goodall, this 104-year-old man, was not terminally ill. He's just old. And his argument, he said that suicide should be a choice for elderly people who are of sound mind. What's the Catholic moral dilemma here?
There are at least a couple of elements to the Catholic perspective on this. One is that we don't really have the choice, when to end our lives for ourselves, right? And typically these choices will be animated by a kind of limited sense of the human being. And in his case, he understood himself to be of no use any longer. And that's a real danger, right? When you think of yourself as, of no use to other people and therefore that you should die, you've got a very limited conception of what the human being is. So that's one aspect of it, a kind of wrong conception of who the human person is. The second of those would be the state. He's not just asking to be allowed to die. He's actually asking to be actively killed by somebody. He's asking for the state to provide him with the means by which he can end his life. That's a real danger, right? We don't want the state to possess that kind of authority, both to judge who is worthy of dying and then also to execute these kinds of things, because it's calling on certain kinds of people to be ready to kill other people.
And when it comes to this issue of assisted suicide, we in the news media are covering this more and more. At least we're seeing more and more cases of this. For example, and I know we're seeing this in certain states, assisted suicide is legal now in 6 states. It's legal in the District of Columbia. But for you as a moral theologian, are you having to deal with this issue more and more and discuss it?
For sure. You're seeing this arise even among students, this sort of notion that freedom entails the freedom even to end one's life or make decisions about the end of life. We should also point out that just last night, right, in Finland, right, there was a vote turning down the state's role in suicide. So they voted against euthanasia. So while I think there is this growing trend that, again, sort of finds its root in a debased conception of the human person, on the other hand, there are signs of hope. Some people are rejecting this like the Finns just did.
I want to go back to your earlier point where you were talking about the state's role in this, or how the government sort of views the assisted suicide situation, because obviously, as you were implying, this could be a slippery slope here. So how does a government, for example, claim it can protect its most vulnerable citizens, those people like the poor or have people who have a disability?
Well, governments do this, right? They do, in many ways, look out for the most vulnerable members of their society. But whenever they get into the business of determining quality of life type questions, they're eroding their own capacity to serve the vulnerable, because the vulnerable are often people whose quality of life is not as high as those of other people. If you look at Dr. Goodall and even the reporting on him, he was kind of an upper middle class person. We were all told how he died to ode to joy. I mean, these are sort of upper class, almost elite ways of presenting things. They're not sort of typical to vulnerable people. So you're seeing the march towards death advance on the prongs of a kind of upper middle class or elitist perspective. Governments are going to be eroding their own capacity to look out for the vulnerable if they allow themselves to do these things.
Well, I know it's an issue that Catholics and so many other people of faith around the world are going to be praying about, and obviously an issue that we'll continue to cover. Dr. Joseph Capiz with the Catholic University of America, thanks so much for talking with us.
Thank you. My pleasure.
A 114-year-old Pennsylvania woman who was the oldest person in the United States has died, according to a funeral home. Delphine Gibson attributed her long life to her faith, her church, and good food. A nursing home manager says she took no medication except for a daily vitamin. Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf says, quote, "She was an incredible Pennsylvanian and she will be missed." Up next, an inside look at the chapel where Meghan Markle and Prince Harry will say, "I do." And the Pope's choir performs at a New York landmark. Mother's Day is Sunday, and it's adding up to be one of the most expensive on record. According to the National Retail Federation, $23.1 billion will be spent on moms this holiday. This includes more than $2 billion on flowers, $4.6 billion on jewelry, and almost $2 billion on spa days. And for all of the moms out there, happy Mother's Day, including mine back in Texas. Welcome back to all of our viewers around the world. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. An archdiocese in Poland starts a pro-life campaign on social media with a twist. Selfie for Life promotes the country's March for the Unborn next month. Archbishop Budzik started it by taking a photo of himself and putting it on Twitter, saying it's a way to thank our parents for bringing us into the world. A monastery in Italy, once on the verge of closing, sees a vocation revival. San Ruggiero was reduced to a few elderly nuns, but 3 years ago, several young sisters arrived and refounded the monastery. It now has 6 nuns who have taken solemn vows and 6 more women who are on their way. The wedding of the year is just over 1 week away, and we're getting a look at the historic chapel where Meghan Markle and Prince Harry will tie the knot. St. George's Chapel is part of Windsor Castle, the oldest and largest inhabited castle in the world and an official residence of Queen Elizabeth. Markle literally will walk over Henry VIII's grave to reach the altar. The future royal went to Catholic high school in Los Angeles. The wedding is May 19th. Finally tonight, the Sistine Chapel Choir sings of peace outside the World Trade Center. The Pope's choir sang the Miserere, a piece that is part of the liturgy of the Holy Week. The pop-up performance took place Wednesday at the Oculus, the transportation hub adjacent to the 9/11 memorial. The 1,500-year-old choir will return to the U.S. this summer for a national tour with stops in 8 cities from New York to L.A. You can learn more at SistineChapelChoirTour.com. And that wraps up our newscast for tonight and this week. We thank you for watching. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. Once again, we wish all mothers, grandmothers a happy Mother's Day this Sunday. We'll be back Monday with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.